I have often asked people to make a hypothetical choice. So I say, in one hand, you have essentially all the money in the world and all the things that could buy. However, you are essentially alone. You don't have anyone that you really love or that loves you, but you have all the material things you could ever hope for. And on the other hand, you can choose amazingly high quality relationships. You have a happy marriage, great relationship with your kids that you might have someday. You get along with your parents amazingly well. You have several best friends that you just really enjoy that time, and you're completely filled up emotionally and psychologically with high quality relationships. But you didn't have a big bag of cash. You just had your, average kind of life in terms of material possessions. Which one would you pick? And most people, I'm actually surprised, most people say, I would want the relationships. And that's what this chapter is about. It's about relationships and how we communicate in those relationships. So we've been talking about the communicator, then the message, then the conversation, and now to that back and forth dynamic, we add the element of what you might call time. In other words, as relationships move forward, they accumulate a little bit of a history, and you can see there's a trajectory to those relationships. There's time, the time element. So let's dig in and look at some different communication theories in these particular research areas that we've been looking at. So we'll start with the cybernetic tradition. And in this area, there's something called relational patterns of interaction. And I'll explain that image there in a minute. Relational patterns of interaction. And that is that in our interactions with other people, we generally send one of three types of messages. We either one-up the person and what was just said. In other words, we attempt to make a power move that puts us above them in the conversation in some way. Maybe we give advice, or we tell them that what we did was even better, or we try to take the floor back in the conversation. Or we one down. One down is where we take the subordinate or submissive position in the conversation, where we agree with what they said, where we go along with what they suggested, where we take their advice. And then there's the one across message, where we communicate in a way that doesn't really make a power move, and it doesn't really respond or give in to a power move. It's sort of just a back and forth conversation where it doesn't seem like anybody's trying to take charge in a dominating way, or it doesn't seem like anyone is trying to let go of power in a particular way. That's one across. So these one up, one down, and one across messages intermingle with each other in pretty interesting ways. The first way they might intermingle is in a symmetrical relationship. Symmetrical meaning similar or same. So let's say the typical example of a symmetrical conversation or relationship is where you are both giving one across messages. You could say that this is in some sense ideal, although it's not necessarily the only right way to do things. There's a lot of different healthy ways to have relationships, but one across is where I'm having a conversation with you and you're having a conversation with me, and neither one of us are really trying to assert a power move. So it might sound a little something like this. A one across symmetrical relationship sounds like this. Hey, what do you want to do tomorrow night? Well, I would like to go to dinner and a movie. That's what I think, but what do you think? What do you want to do? And so you notice one person here is asking, and so they're giving the other person the chance to be in charge, if you will. But then when the person responds, dinner and a movie, but what do you want to do? See, they express themselves, but then they give the floor back to the other person and say, now you tell me what you want to do. And so they're not trying, neither party here in this back and forth symmetrical relationship is trying to hang on to power, or they're neither really trying to readily submit to someone's power move. It's one across messages, where power is really not part of that. That's I guess you could call it the conceptual or ideal symmetrical relationship. But sometimes we experience symmetrical relationships when both people are trying to one up. So I say, oh, I had the best vacation. We just come back from spring break, right? I had the best vacation, and then I tell you a little bit about it, and they say, oh, that's nothing. My vacation was even better. And then they tell you about all the great things they did and say, oh, yeah? Well, here's something I didn't mention before that makes mine even better. And both people are trying to one-up each other. Even though they're both trying to one-up, they're both making those dominant power moves, they're still symmetrical because they're both communicating in the same way. They're trying to outdo each other or one-up each other. Both people can also try to one down each other. They're both trying to get underneath the other person in the conversation, and that's also symmetrical. What do you want to do Friday night? I don't know. What do you want to do? I don't know. Whatever you decide is fine. No, whatever you decide is fine. They're both fighting for that low position in the relationship. That's also symmetrical because it's the same. A complementary relationship is one where one person is one up and the other person is one down. So someone assumes a leadership role in the conversation on that particular topic, for example, and the other person a following role. And so complementary is not necessarily a bad type of relationship pattern. In fact, in my relationship with my wife, for example, some things she takes a leadership role in the conversation, and in other areas, I take the leadership role in the conversation. If we are talking about, for example, skiing, snowboarding, all kinds of winter sports, then she definitely is taking the lead in that conversation because of her background, growing up in Colorado and working in various ski resorts and teaching people how to ski and snowboard. And so she knows everything about everything. And my skills in comparison are pretty basic when it comes to skiing. So I would one down. If she's saying something in that conversation, she says, oh, here are the best skis. This is the best brand. I would say, okay, because I would submit. I would take my one down position to her one up move because I know that she's right. So that's a complementary relationship or a complementary pattern of interaction. And in the same way, on the flip side of the coin, if it's in an area where I have a little bit more of an expertise or some knowledge, I take the lead. I take the one up position. She might take the one down position in that conversation because it's an area that I know quite a bit about. If we're talking about music and the history of rock music or pop music, I know a lot about that. Too much. Not as much as Joe Chesbro, but I do know a lot in my relationship compared to my wife. So she might ask me questions and I give her the answers. And so that I'm one-upping and she's one-downing. So a complementary relationship is not necessarily bad. It's just one up, one down. The times where it starts to bother people, however, are when one person in the relationship always has to be the one-up person. They always have to dominate that conversation, and they will always try to one-up you, one-up you, one-up you, and they won't ever take that one-down position. And that can get a little tiring. If someone's always trying to outdo the other person, that can get a little tiring for everybody. So that's usually when we see people getting a bit uncomfortable with it and wanting to change things up. A lot of times we see this in our family interaction. We grow up, for example, with a mom or a dad, and they're the adult and we're the kid. So just because of the way that arrangement is, we're young, we don't really know anything, we're just babies, right? So they start one-upping. They tell you to clean up, they tell you to brush your teeth and go to bed and all that. But then as we grow older, we start to feel like we're adults and we want to be talked to like we're adults. But the pattern of interaction that has been going on almost our entire lives is now difficult to break. It's difficult to escape from. So the parents continue to want to talk to you like you're a child, even though you might see yourself as grown. That becomes a point of friction. So then you go back home, maybe for the weekend or for the holidays, and they start talking to you like you're 13 years old again. And you might fight that, and you might say, hey, come on, I'm an adult, take it easy. Or you might just give in and say, okay, you want to be the adult, I'll be the kid. And that can work out fine if it's okay with you, but it can also cause some friction in the relationship. So here's a picture to the right here. This is a famous, in Japan, sumo wrestling is like pro football in the United States. It's the biggest, it's the national sport. And there's a running joke in sumo that at some point during tournament, they'll take one of the biggest, hugest sumo wrestlers, and they'll pick some kid out of the crowd, the skinnier the better, and they'll make it seem like this little kid is going to face off with the big giant. And it's this demonstration of what the symmetrical pattern of interaction looks like. And the big joke is, by the way, that these kids act real tough. They act like they're going to be able to take on the championship sumo guy, and so they have fun with it, and everybody laughs. It's one of these running jokes that you see at sumo tournaments. I don't think there's really an equivalent to this in United States sports. It's just kind of a fun cultural joke that everybody is in on. But it demonstrates this vastly complementary relationship that obviously one person is clearly dominant over the other, compared to normal sumo, where you see they're both fighting for the one-up position.